Welcome to Revenge Central. Today I will read 2 fresh revenge stories. If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing and let's get started with Story 1. She stole my job offer, so I made sure she could never work in this industry again. I am going to tell you this story the way a lawyer tells a story to a jury, with precision, with evidence, and with the absolute certainty that the facts, presented in the correct order, will lead to only one possible conclusion. My name is Elena Vasquez. I am a senior UX designer with 9 years of experience, a portfolio that has been featured in 2 industry publications, and a track record of shipping products that have been used by millions of people. And for 8 months, I believed that my career trajectory was leading me to a dream job at a company called Meridian Technologies, until I discovered that the job had been given to someone who had stolen every idea I had shared during the interview process. Let me establish the facts. I am 34 years old. I was born in Miami, the daughter of Cuban immigrants who came to this country with nothing and built a life through sheer determination and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. My mother was a nurse who worked double shifts for 20 years. My father drove a taxi and then started a small landscaping business that employed 15 people by the time I was in high school. They taught me 2 things. First, that hard work is non-negotiable. Second, that anyone who tries to take what is yours should be met with a response proportionate to the theft. I studied interaction design at Carnegie Mellon, where I graduated with honors and a portfolio that my professors described as unusually mature for a student. I spent my first 4 years after graduation at a mid-size agency in Chicago, where I worked on projects for clients ranging from healthcare systems to financial services platforms. I moved to a product company in Seattle after that, then to my current role at a startup in San Francisco, where I lead a team of 4 designers. My work has been featured in Smashing Magazine and in the book Design Systems by Alla Kolmatova. I mention these credentials not to boast, but to establish that I am a professional of standing in my field, and that the theft I am about to describe was not the appropriation of amateur work, but the systematic co-optation of a carefully built professional reputation. In March of last year, I saw a job posting on LinkedIn for a senior UX designer position at Meridian Technologies. Meridian is a well-known company in the enterprise software space, and their design team had a reputation for doing exceptional work. The role reported directly to the VP of Design, a woman named Catherine Liu, whose work I had admired for years. The salary range was listed at $160,000 to $200,000, which was a significant step up from my current compensation. I applied within hours of seeing the posting. The interview process was extensive. It consisted of 5 rounds spread over 6 weeks. Round 1 was a phone screen with a recruiter. Round 2 was a video call with the hiring manager, Catherine Liu. Round 3 was a portfolio review, for which I was asked to prepare a presentation of 3 case studies from my past work. Round 4 was a design exercise, in which I was given a hypothetical product problem and asked to walk through my design process. Round 5 was an on-site interview with the full design team, including Catherine, 2 principal designers, and a product manager. I prepared for each round with the thoroughness that has defined my entire professional life. For the portfolio review specifically, I spent 2 full weeks refining my case studies. Each case study followed a framework I had developed over years of presenting work to stakeholders. The framework covered 7 areas: the business context and strategic challenge, the research methodology and key findings, the design principles that emerged from the research, the ideation process, including rejected concepts and the reasoning for their rejection, the final design solution with annotated wireframes and prototypes, the implementation process and the compromises required to ship, and the outcomes, measured both quantitatively through metrics and qualitatively through user feedback. Each of my 3 case studies was between 3,000 and 5,000 words, accompanied by dozens of images, data visualizations, and annotated design files. The healthcare scheduling redesign, my first case study, documented a 14-month project that I had led from initial research through launch and post-launch optimization. I included the original analytics data showing the appointment completion rate before the redesign, the user interview transcripts that had revealed the key pain points, and the before and after metrics that demonstrated the 34% improvement. Every claim was supported by evidence. Every design decision was traced back to a specific user need identified in the research phase. The presentation was, in the language of my field, bulletproof. I researched Meridian's products, their competitors, their user base, and their design language. I studied Catherine Liu's public talks and interviews. I reviewed the portfolios of every member of the design team. I created a custom presentation template that echoed Meridian's brand aesthetic. I rehearsed my case studies until I could deliver them in my sleep. During the portfolio review, round 3, I presented 3 projects. The first was a redesign of a healthcare scheduling application that had increased appointment completion rates by 34%. The second was an enterprise dashboard that I had designed from scratch for a logistics company, reducing average task completion time from 12 clicks to 3. The third was a concept project, something I had done on my own time, exploring the future of voice interface design for accessibility. I was particularly proud of this third project, because it represented my original thinking, not just my execution of someone else's vision. The design exercise in round 4 asked me to redesign the onboarding flow trace. The hypothetical product was described in a 1-page brief that outlined the company's business model, target users, and current pain points. The target users were mid-level managers at companies with between 200 and 2,000 employees. The current onboarding flow consisted of 12 steps, including account creation, profile setup, team configuration, data import, and a series of tutorial modules. The brief noted that user research had identified a 62% drop-off rate during onboarding, with the highest attrition occurring between steps 4 and 7, which involved data import and team configuration. I approached the problem by first mapping the cognitive load at each step of the existing flow. Steps 1 through 3, account creation and profile setup, were straightforward and had low cognitive load. Step 4, data import, required users to upload and map data from their previous system, which involved understanding data schemas and field mappings that most managers were not familiar with. Steps 5 and 6, team configuration and permission settings, required users to make decisions about organizational structure and access levels that they were not prepared to make without context. Step 7 was the first tutorial module, and by that point, many users had already abandoned the process. My solution restructured the flow into 3 phases. Phase 1 was Quick Start, which covered only account creation and basic profile setup, getting the user into the product in under 2 minutes. Phase 2 was Guided Setup, which used the progressive disclosure model to walk users through data import and team configuration one decision at a time, with contextual help and smart defaults that reduced the number of explicit choices required. Phase 3 was Full Configuration, which users could complete at their own pace after they had already experienced the core value of the product. The progressive disclosure model that became the centerpiece of Priya's theft was the engine that powered Phase 2. Instead of presenting users with a wall of configuration options, the system assessed the user's proficiency level through a brief interactive questionnaire and then adapted the complexity of the interface in real time. A user who indicated they were comfortable with data management saw the full import wizard with advanced options. A user who indicated they were new to this type of tool saw a simplified version with pre-populated recommendations and a "just tell us what you need" conversational interface. The system met users where they were, rather than demanding that all users climb the same mountain, for a hypothetical B2B SaaS product. I was given 48 hours to complete it. I spent those 48 hours doing thorough research, creating user personas, mapping the user journey, sketching wireframes, building a high-fidelity prototype in Figma, and writing a detailed rationale document explaining every design decision. The prototype was, if I may say so, exceptional. It was thoughtful and user-centered and visually polished, and it addressed the specific pain points outlined in the brief, with solutions that were both creative and practical. During the on-site interview, round 5, I presented my design exercise to the team. Catherine Liu asked me detailed questions about my process, my design decisions, and my approach to user research. The conversation was rigorous and intellectual, and exactly the kind of dialogue I had been hoping for throughout my entire career. At one point, one of the principal designers said, "I have never seen anyone approach the accessibility question with this level of specificity." Catherine nodded and made a note on her iPad, and I left the room feeling, for the first time in the interview process, that the job was truly mine to lose. Here is where the story takes its turn. During the interview process, I had been in regular contact with a woman named Priya Sharma. Priya and I had been friends since college, where we had both studied interaction design. We had stayed in touch over the years, working at different companies but occasionally collaborating on side projects and sharing industry gossip. When I told Priya I was interviewing at Meridian, she was excited for me. She asked me detailed questions about the process, and I answered them, because she was my friend, and that is what friends do. I told her about the design exercise. I described the brief, the approach I had taken, and the solutions I had developed. I did not show her the actual files, because the exercise was under NDA, but I talked through my thinking at a high level. I told her about my accessibility concept for the onboarding flow, which involved a progressive disclosure model that adapted in real time to the user's proficiency level. I told her about the micro-interactions I had designed to reduce cognitive load during the most complex steps. I told her about the research framework I had used, which combined quantitative analytics data with qualitative user interviews. What I did not know at the time was that Priya had also applied for the Meridian position. Priya and I had been friends for 11 years. We met during our sophomore year at Carnegie Mellon, when we were assigned adjacent desks in the design studio. She was bright and funny and ambitious, and we bonded immediately over our shared love of typography and our shared frustration with a professor who insisted on teaching design theory through the lens of architecture, which neither of us found remotely relevant. Over the years, our friendship had evolved through the natural stages of post-college life: the intense daily texting phase, the monthly phone call phase, and finally, the occasional catch-up over coffee phase that is the default state of most adult friendships. I trusted Priya. I trusted her with professional information, with personal information, with the kind of honest assessment of my work that only a true peer can provide. When I was struggling with a design problem, I would call her and talk through it, and she would offer insights that were genuinely helpful. When she was between jobs, I had recommended her for 2 positions, both of which she received. I had always assumed that our professional relationship was reciprocal, that she would do for me what I had done for her. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things where Priya was concerned. Looking back, I can identify moments where I should have been more cautious. There was the time, 3 years ago, when Priya presented a design concept at a conference that bore a noticeable resemblance to a concept I had shared with her during a phone call the previous month. I noticed the similarity, but I dismissed it, because the concept was generic enough that independent development was plausible. There was the time when a mutual colleague mentioned that Priya had used a research framework during a client presentation that sounded a lot like one I had developed and shared with our friend group. Again, I noted it and moved on. I did not want to believe that my friend was capable of systematic theft, because believing that would have meant confronting the fact that someone I cared about was not who I thought they were. She had not told me. She had applied 2 weeks after I had, using a referral from a mutual connection, and she had been moved into the interview process in parallel with mine. She was, at the time I was sharing my interview details with her, preparing for her own rounds with Meridian. I found out about Priya's application 3 months after my interview process had ended. By that point, I had been rejected. The rejection email was polite and generic, thanking me for my time and saying that they had decided to move forward with another candidate whose experience more closely aligned with the team's current needs. I was disappointed but not devastated. These things happen. I had been a finalist for enough positions to know that being the second choice is a familiar ache, and I moved on. I found out about Priya through LinkedIn. The moment I saw that post, something clicked into place in my mind. Pieces that had seemed disconnected suddenly formed a pattern, the way a constellation reveals its shape only when you look at the right set of stars. I thought about the conference presentation 3 years ago. I thought about the research framework incident. I thought about a dozen smaller moments over the past decade where Priya had seemed to know things about my work that I had not shared publicly, where she had produced ideas or concepts that felt familiar in a way I could not immediately articulate. The pattern had been there for years. I had simply refused to see it. I should also acknowledge that my reaction was not purely rational. There was grief in it. There was the grief of losing a friendship, or rather, the grief of discovering that the friendship had been a fiction, a performance conducted by someone who saw me not as a friend but as a resource. There was also anger, a white-hot anger that surprised me with its intensity, because I am not by nature an angry person. I am methodical, careful, deliberate. But discovering that someone you trusted has stolen your work and used it to take the job you had earned is the kind of betrayal that bypasses reason and goes straight to the primitive part of the brain that demands justice. I did not act on that anger immediately. I am a designer. Designers solve problems through process, not impulse. I took a breath. I opened a new document. I began to build my case. She posted an announcement, thrilled to join Meridian Technologies as senior UX designer, with a photo of herself in front of the Meridian logo. I stared at that post for a long time. I clicked through to her profile and saw that she had updated her portfolio with a case study that described, in detail, a design exercise for a B2B SaaS onboarding flow, the progressive disclosure model, the adaptive proficiency level interface, the micro-interactions for cognitive load reduction. Even the research framework was there, described in language that was uncomfortably close to the way I had described it to Priya over the phone. My blood went cold. I took screenshots of everything. Priya's LinkedIn announcement, her updated portfolio, the case study. I compared the case study to my own design exercise documents, which I still had saved on my computer and in my Figma account, complete with creation dates and edit history. The similarities were not coincidental. They were not parallel thinking. They were verbatim, concept for concept, in several places, phrase for phrase, my work presented as hers. I spent the next 3 weeks conducting a methodical investigation. I use the word investigation deliberately, because that is what it was. I am a designer, and designers are trained to notice patterns, to identify inconsistencies, to find the gap between what something claims to be and what it actually is. I applied those same skills to the situation with Priya, and what I found was worse than I had initially suspected. The first thing I did was create a detailed comparison document. The document ran to 42 pages. I used a systematic methodology. I divided each project into its constituent elements, which included the problem statement, the research approach, the design principles, the solution architecture, the interaction patterns, the visual design language, and the metrics framework. For each element, I created a 2-column comparison, my version on the left, Priya's version on the right. Where the language was identical or nearly identical, I highlighted it in yellow. Where the concepts were the same, but the language was different, I highlighted it in blue. The document contained 63 yellow highlights and 29 blue highlights across the 3 projects I was able to compare. I want to be precise about what constituted a yellow highlight. These were not general statements, like user-centered design is important, which could be attributed to shared professional vocabulary. These were specific, idiosyncratic expressions that reflected my personal way of thinking about design. For example, I have a phrase that I use frequently. Accessibility is not a feature, it is a foundation. That phrase appeared in Priya's portfolio case study verbatim, despite the fact that I had coined it during a presentation at a design meetup 2 years ago and had never seen it used by anyone else. Similarly, my description of the progressive disclosure model used the phrase layered revelation of complexity, which is a formulation that I developed specifically for that project and which appeared, word for word, in Priya's case study. The probability of 2 independent designers producing identical idiosyncratic phrases across multiple projects is, to put it conservatively, vanishingly small. This was not parallel thinking. This was copying. I took Priya's portfolio case study and my own design exercise, and I placed them side by side, section by section. The structure was identical. The problem framing was identical. The user persona descriptions used nearly identical language. The journey map followed the same flow. The wireframe layouts, while not pixel-for-pixel copies, employed the same layout patterns and information hierarchy. The rationale document, which Priya had included as part of her case study, made the same arguments in the same order, using in several places the exact same phrases I had used when describing my approach to Priya on the phone. I also discovered that Priya's portfolio contained other work. I spent 2 weeks conducting a systematic audit of Priya's entire public-facing portfolio. I compared every project, every case study, every design artifact against the broader landscape of published design work. I used reverse image search on her wireframes and prototypes. I searched for distinctive phrases from her case study text. I cross-referenced her project timelines against the published timelines of projects by other designers in our network. The results were damning. Of the 8 case studies in Priya's portfolio, I identified significant similarities to other designers' work in 5 of them. 2 of the 5 were what I would characterize as inspiration with insufficient transformation, meaning that Priya had clearly drawn on another designer's work but had modified it enough that a casual observer might not notice. The other 3, including the Meridian design exercise and the James Okafor framework, were what I would characterize as unacceptable appropriation, meaning that the work had been presented with minimal or no modification and without attribution. I compiled my findings into a supplementary document that ran to 28 pages. I contacted every designer whose work appeared to have been appropriated. Tomoko Hayashi and James Okafor were the most responsive, but I also heard from a designer in Toronto named Sarah Chen, who recognized elements of her accessibility research in one of Priya's case studies, and from a designer in London named Marcus Webb, who identified his interaction patterns in another. In total, I gathered statements from 5 designers who confirmed that Priya had used their work without permission or attribution, that was suspiciously similar to projects created by other designers in our professional network. A responsive redesign project bore a striking resemblance to a project by a designer named Tomoko Hayashi, who had presented it at a design conference 2 years earlier. An accessibility audit used a framework that had been developed by a designer named James Okafor and published on Medium. Priya had presented these as her own original work, with no attribution and no acknowledgement. I contacted Tomoko and James. Both confirmed that they had never authorized Priya to use their work. Both were upset, but not surprised. James told me that he had previously confronted Priya about using his framework without credit, and she had deflected, saying that methodologies aren't copyrightable, and that she had arrived at the same conclusions independently. Tomoko said she had noticed similarities in Priya's portfolio before, but had chosen not to pursue it because it didn't seem worth the drama. I hired a lawyer. Her name was Sandra Ko. I found Sandra through a recommendation from a colleague who had used her services in a non-compete dispute. She operated a small firm in San Francisco that specialized exclusively in intellectual property matters related to the technology and design industries. When I first met her, in her office on the 14th floor of a building overlooking the Bay Bridge, she listened to my story for 45 minutes without interrupting. Then she said, "You have a strong case, but I want to be honest with you about the challenges. Design concepts are not like software code. They are not protectable under patent law, and copyright protection for functional design is limited. What we have here is a misappropriation case, and misappropriation cases are fact-intensive and difficult to win. But we are not going to court. We are going to use the threat of public exposure to force Meridian's hand, and we are going to use the evidence of pattern behavior to force the professional organizations to act. The goal is not a legal victory. The goal is professional consequences." This framing was exactly right, and it was the moment I knew Sandra was the right lawyer for this case. She understood that what I wanted was not money, though money would be welcome, but accountability. I wanted Priya to lose something of value, the way I had lost something of value. I wanted the job she had stolen to be taken from her, and I wanted her ability to steal again to be diminished. Sandra's strategy was designed to achieve exactly those outcomes, without the time, expense, and uncertainty of litigation, and she specialized in intellectual property disputes in the tech industry. I showed her my comparison document, my Figma file history, my text message logs with Priya, and the testimonials from Tomoko and James. Sandra reviewed everything for a week and then called me with her assessment. She said that while individual design concepts are difficult to protect under copyright law, the specific combination of concepts, the exact language used to describe them, and the timeline of communications created a strong circumstantial case that Priya had obtained the Meridian position through intellectual property theft. Sandra drafted a letter to Meridian's general counsel. The letter was 12 pages long and included the comparison document, the Figma creation timestamps, the text message logs, and sworn statements from Tomoko and James. It requested that Meridian conduct an internal investigation into Priya's hiring and the provenance of her portfolio materials. It also noted that if Meridian chose not to investigate, the matter would be referred to the appropriate professional organizations and potentially to the press. Meridian's response was swift. Within 48 hours of receiving Sandra's letter, Catherine Liu called me directly. She was, to her credit, genuinely shocked. She told me that the hiring committee had been impressed by Priya's design exercise in particular, and that the concepts Priya had presented, specifically the progressive disclosure model and the adaptive proficiency interface, had been a major factor in their decision to extend the offer. She asked me to send her my original files immediately. I sent them. Catherine reviewed my Figma history, which showed the file creation date, the edit timeline, and the full version history of every design iteration. She compared it to the materials Priya had submitted during her interview process. She called me back the next day, and her voice was different. She told me that she had spent the previous evening reviewing the materials I had sent, and that she had also pulled Priya's interview files from Meridian's internal records. What she found was this. During Priya's own design exercise presentation, Priya had struggled to answer detailed questions about the research methodology behind her proposed solutions. She had been able to describe the solutions themselves in fluent detail because she had memorized the concepts from our conversations, but when asked to explain why she had chosen a particular research approach over alternatives, or how she had validated her design decisions with users, she had been vague and evasive. Catherine said that at the time, the interview panel had attributed this to interview nerves. In retrospect, the gaps in Priya's explanations were exactly the gaps you would expect from someone presenting borrowed work. They can describe the what, but not the why, because the why belonged to someone else. Catherine also told me something that I had not known. During Priya's on-site interview, one of the principal designers had asked Priya about the accessibility concept, specifically the progressive disclosure model, and had commented that it was remarkably similar to something they had seen in another candidate's presentation. Priya had reportedly laughed it off, saying that great minds think alike. No one had pursued it further, because why would they? It was an interview, not a trial. Candidates are expected to bring their best ideas, and sometimes those ideas overlap. No one imagined that the overlap was not coincidental. The warmth was gone. She was precise and professional and visibly angry, though not at me. She told me that Meridian was initiating an internal review and that I would hear from their legal department. The internal review took 2 weeks. During that time, Priya was placed on administrative leave. I learned later, through a contact inside Meridian, that the review had been thorough and uncomfortable. Priya had been asked to explain the similarities between her design exercise and mine. She had apparently claimed that she had developed the concepts independently, and that any similarities were coincidental. When presented with the text message logs showing that I had described the concepts to her before her own interview, she had said that our conversation had been general and not specific enough to constitute sharing intellectual property. When asked about the framework from James Okafor's Medium article, she had said that she could not recall where she had first encountered the methodology. Meridian's conclusion was decisive. The investigation had also uncovered something that even I had not known. Priya had used a mutual connection to obtain an introduction to one of Meridian's design principles before her first interview. During that introductory coffee meeting, Priya had reportedly asked detailed questions about Meridian's current design challenges and the team's priorities. This was not unusual in itself. Candidates often do research before interviews, but the specific questions Priya asked, according to the principal, felt like she already knew the answers and was just confirming them, which, in light of everything else, suggested that Priya had been gathering intelligence from multiple sources, including me, to construct a perfectly tailored interview performance. The day Priya was terminated, I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize. I answered it, and a voice said, "Elena, it's Catherine." She paused, and then she said, "I owe you an apology. Not just for what happened with the position, but for not seeing what was right in front of me during the interviews. I told her that she had no reason to apologize because Priya's deception was sophisticated and well executed, and that the interview process was designed to evaluate candidates, not to detect fraud. Catherine thanked me for that, but I could tell she was still angry, mostly at herself, and I understood. Because that is how I had felt when I first looked at Priya's portfolio and realized that the signs had been there for years, and I had chosen not to see them. On a Friday afternoon, Priya Sharma was terminated for cause. The reason given, according to my source, was misrepresentation of credentials and portfolio materials during the hiring process. Her LinkedIn profile was updated to remove the Meridian position within hours of her termination. She also quietly removed the disputed case study from her portfolio, although not before I had archived a complete copy. But I was not done. I drafted a comprehensive summary of the entire situation and shared it with the professional organizations to which Priya belonged: the Interaction Design Association, the User Experience Professionals Association, and IGA, the Professional Association for Design. Each organization has a code of ethics that prohibits the misrepresentation of work, and each organization has a process for investigating complaints. I filed formal complaints with all three, including my evidence package. I also reached out to the design community more broadly. I want to address the question of whether my public post was fair. It is a question I asked myself many times, and it is a question that several people raised in the comments and in private messages. The post did not name Priya, but it contained enough specific detail that anyone with knowledge of the situation could identify her. Was that right? Was it necessary? My answer is this. I explored every private avenue available to me before going public. I contacted Meridian privately. I contacted the professional organizations privately. I contacted the other affected designers privately. I gave Priya the opportunity to come clean through the investigation processes, and she chose not to take it. At every stage, the private channels produced outcomes that were either invisible to the broader community or insufficient to prevent future harm. Priya's termination from Meridian was confidential. The professional organization revocations were either invisible or quiet. The other affected designers had chosen, for their own valid reasons, not to pursue their cases publicly. The only tool that remained for creating meaningful deterrence was public exposure. I do not believe that public shaming should be the first response to professional misconduct. I believe it should be the last, deployed only when all other avenues have been exhausted and when the misconduct is serious enough to warrant it. I believe I met both of those criteria. Your mileage may vary. I wrote a post on a popular design forum using my real name, describing what had happened in measured and factual language. I did not name Priya in the initial post, out of an abundance of legal caution, but the details were specific enough that anyone who knew both of us could draw their own conclusions. The post received over 400 comments. The comment section became a repository of stories from designers who had experienced similar betrayals. A woman named Rachel described a former colleague who had included her work in a team portfolio without individual attribution, making it impossible for hiring managers to know which parts were Rachel's and which were the colleagues'. A man named David described a situation in which his boss had taken credit for a design system David had built, presenting it at industry conferences as the company's collective achievement, while David sat in the audience. A woman named Aishisha described discovering that her thesis advisor had published her master's thesis research under his own name, a story that was so similar to what I had heard about academic fraud that it made me wonder whether this pattern of theft is universal across knowledge work professions, or whether it is somehow specific to fields where the primary output is intellectual property. I read every single comment. Some were supportive, some were critical, a few were cruel, suggesting that I was bitter or unable to compete on merit. I responded to none of them because I had learned, over the course of this whole experience, that engaging with people who are determined to misunderstand you is a waste of the energy you need for more important things. But I saved every comment because they were evidence of a broader truth. What happened to me was not an isolated incident. It was a systemic vulnerability, and addressing it would require systemic solutions, not just individual acts of resistance. Many from designers who shared similar experiences of having their work co-opted by colleagues or competitors. The professional organizations acted more slowly than I would have liked they. The IGZA investigation was the most rigorous. They appointed a 3-member review panel that included a design academic, an industry practitioner, and a legal advisor. I was asked to submit a formal written statement, which I did, supported by my complete evidence package. I was also asked to participate in a video interview with the panel, which lasted 90 minutes and covered every aspect of the case in exhaustive detail. Priya was given the same opportunity. I do not know what she said in her interview, but I know that the panel's final report cited the overwhelming similarity between my work and hers, the unexplained timeline of our communications, and the pattern of misattribution across her portfolio as the basis for their decision. The UXPA process was less formal but equally thorough. Their ethics committee reviewed the evidence and conducted their own independent analysis, comparing Priya's portfolio against publicly available work by the designers she had apparently borrowed from. Their report was particularly scathing on the subject of the James Okafor framework, noting that Priya had not merely used the framework but had presented it as her own original contribution to the field, going so far as to rename it and rebrand it with different terminology while maintaining the identical structure and methodology. IGZA's process was the most frustrating. Their review took 6 months, and their communications were vague and non-committal throughout. When they finally reached a decision, it was to revoke Priya's membership without public acknowledgement, which meant that the revocation was invisible to anyone outside the organization. I expressed my disappointment to the IGZA ethics officer, who told me, in so many words, that professional organizations are reluctant to create public spectacle and prefer to handle ethics matters discreetly. I understood the impulse toward discretion. I did not agree with it. Discretion protects the institution, not the victims, but they did act. The UXPA conducted a 3-month review and found that Priya had violated their code of ethics by presenting another designer's work as her own. They revoked her membership and published a notice in their newsletter. The UXPA reached a similar conclusion. IGZA, after a protracted review process, also revoked her membership, although they did so quietly, without a public announcement, which I found disappointing but not surprising. The impact on Priya's career was significant and lasting. I learned, through the grapevine, that Priya had moved back in with her parents in suburban New Jersey. She had taken a freelance project for a local real estate company, designing a website, which was the kind of work that someone with her supposed credentials should have been able to do in her sleep, but which apparently took her far longer than expected, because the client posted a review mentioning delays and communication issues. She applied for a full-time position at a design agency in Philadelphia and made it to the final round before the agency's background check turned up the IGZA revocation. They withdrew the offer without explanation. But Priya knew, and I knew, and the 12,000 people who had read my forum post knew. There is a concept in the legal world called chilling effect, which refers to the deterrent effect that a visible punishment has on others who might be considering similar behavior. I believe my actions had a chilling effect on portfolio plagiarism in our corner of the design industry. In the months following the forum post and the professional organization revocations, I received messages from dozens of designers who told me that they had become more careful about sharing their work, more protective of their ideas, and more willing to speak up when they noticed plagiarism. Several design managers told me that they had added portfolio verification steps to their hiring processes, asking candidates to walk through their design process in real time during interviews rather than relying solely on static case studies. These changes are small, but they are real, and they are lasting. The design industry has a plagiarism problem that no one wants to talk about, because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that the portfolio-based hiring system, which is the foundation of our entire profession, is fundamentally vulnerable to deception. Portfolios are self-reported. There is no verification mechanism. A designer can include anyone's work in their portfolio and claim it as their own, and the only thing preventing widespread fraud is the assumption that people are honest. That assumption, as my experience demonstrates, is not always justified. In the design industry, reputation is everything. Your portfolio is your resume, your credentials, your proof of competence. When your portfolio is revealed to contain stolen work, the taint is almost impossible to remove. Priya applied for at least a dozen positions in the year following her termination from Meridian, according to mutual acquaintances. She received no offers. Several companies that interviewed her withdrew their candidacy after conducting background checks that turned up the IJSTAC and UXPA revocations. I do not take pleasure in Priya's professional destruction, or at least I try not to. There is a part of me, the honest part, that feels a grim satisfaction when I hear that she is struggling, because she took something from me that was valuable and meaningful and rare, and she did it with the casual indifference of someone who believed they would never be caught. But the larger part of me recognizes that Priya's behavior was symptomatic of a broader problem in our industry, a culture that rewards confidence over competence and visibility over integrity, and that the real revenge was not destroying Priya, but forcing the industry to confront its own complicity in creating her. As for me, the story has a mostly happy ending. I want to be honest about the cost of what I did. Pursuing justice, even through legitimate channels, is exhausting. It consumed 4 months of my life, during which I was less present for my partner, less focused on my actual job, and less creative than I wanted to be. The legal fees were significant, although Sandra, to her credit, offered me a reduced rate because she believed in the case. The emotional toll was the heaviest. I had nightmares about the interview process, about seeing Priya in the Meridian office, about presenting my work to a room full of people who were secretly comparing it to a stolen version. I developed a stress-related rash on my hands that my doctor said was triggered by anxiety. I lost 5 pounds that I could not afford to lose. There were also professional risks. Some people in the industry, a small but vocal minority, characterized me as vindictive, as someone who had overreacted to a minor infraction, as someone who should have just moved on. A prominent design leader, someone with a large social media following, posted a thread arguing that portfolio inspiration was different from theft, and that the design community should be generous with ideas. I did not engage with this discourse publicly, because I knew that engaging would only prolong the drama, but privately it infuriated me. There is a difference between being inspired by someone's work and reproducing it nearly verbatim, and presenting it as your own in a job interview for a 6-figure position. Anyone who cannot see that difference is either being deliberately obtuse or has never had their work stolen. I also lost a friend. I know that sounds strange, given that Priya's actions revealed that she was never truly a friend. But the version of Priya that I loved, the version that existed in my mind and in our shared history, that version was real to me, and losing it was genuinely painful. There were moments during the investigation when I missed her, when I wanted to call her and tell her about something funny that had happened at work, or ask her opinion about a design problem, and then I would remember that I could not, because the person on the other end of the phone had been using those conversations as intelligence-gathering operations. The last time I communicated with Priya was a letter I sent after the IJSIMRI revocation. It was short. I told her that I had hoped, at some point during the process, that she would apologize, not because an apology would have changed anything, but because it would have indicated that she understood the magnitude of what she had done. She never apologized. She never contacted me at all. I heard, third hand, that she had told someone that I was obsessed and unable to let things go. I suppose that is one interpretation. My own interpretation is that when someone steals something irreplaceable from you, letting it go is not a sign of maturity. It is a sign of capitulation. Catherine Liu, having been personally embarrassed by the incident, reached out to me 6 months after Priya's termination to offer me the position that had originally been mine. I accepted. I have been at Meridian for 8 months now, and the work is everything I hoped it would be. Catherine and I have a relationship built on trust and mutual respect, which is, I have come to believe, the only foundation on which good professional relationships can be built. Priya taught me that lesson, albeit at a very high price. The progressive disclosure onboarding flow that I designed during that exercise is now live in Meridian's product. It is used by approximately 40,000 people every day. The metrics exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Onboarding abandonment dropped from 62% to 34%. A reduction of nearly half. The average time to complete onboarding decreased from 47 minutes to 22 minutes. User satisfaction scores for the onboarding experience, measured through an in-product survey, went from 3.1 out of 5 to 4.6 out of 5. Catherine told me, during my first performance review, that the onboarding redesign had been the single most impactful design change Meridian had shipped in 2 years. There is a particular satisfaction in watching your work succeed in the world. It is different from the satisfaction of creating something beautiful in private. Private creation is personal. Public success is shared. When 40,000 people use something you designed, and when that thing makes their lives measurably better, you become part of their daily experience in a way that is both invisible and profound. They do not know your name. They do not need to. They just know that this product is easier to use than it used to be, and that ease is the result of your thinking, your effort, your skill. Priya will never have that satisfaction. She will never watch her own work succeed at scale, because the work she presented as hers was never hers, and the work that is truly hers, whatever that might be, remains unseen. That, more than anything else, is the consequence of her choices, not the lost job, not the revoked memberships, not the damaged reputation. The consequence is that she will never know what it feels like to create something that genuinely helps people, because she chose the shortcut over the journey, and in doing so, she forfeited the destination, and it has reduced onboarding abandonment by 28%. My name is in the design credits. It always was, even when the world did not know it. Story 2. The Airbnb guests from hell tried to ruin my home. They picked the wrong host. Let me tell you something about historic homes. People see the Instagram photos. They see the exposed brick and the original hardwood floors and the clawfoot tub, and they think, oh, how charming, I'd love to stay somewhere like that. They don't think about what it takes. They don't think about the 7 years I spent stripping paint with a heat gun in a mask at 2 in the morning because I had a day job. They don't think about the $140,000 in restoration costs. They don't think about the weekends I spent learning to reglaze windows because the original 1887 wavy glass was too precious to replace. My name is Daniel. I'm 39 years old, and I own a Queen Anne Victorian in the historic district of Asheville, North Carolina. Bought it in 2016 for $285,000 when it was basically a condemned shell with good bones. Spent the next 7 years turning it into something genuinely beautiful. Every single detail was deliberate. The foyer wallpaper was a custom reproduction of an 1890s William Morris pattern that cost me $1,200 for the paper alone. The mantelpiece in the parlor was salvaged from a demolished Victorian in Savannah, and I spent 3 weekends fitting it. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this so you understand what was at stake. I listed the home on Airbnb in 2023 after the restoration was complete. Partially to help cover the mortgage, partially because I genuinely loved sharing the space with people who appreciated historic architecture. I was a superhost within 6 months, 5-star reviews across the board. My listing was meticulous. House rules were clear, maximum 4 guests, no parties, no smoking. Quiet hours after 10 p.m., check-in at 3 p.m., check-out at 11 a.m., standard stuff. I also had security cameras, 4 of them, one covering the front porch and approach, one covering the driveway and detached garage, one in the foyer covering the front door and staircase, and one in the hallway outside the bedrooms. I need to be very clear about something. Every single camera was fully disclosed in my listing, in the house rules, in the check-in instructions, and again in a welcome message sent 3 hours before arrival. North Carolina is a one-party consent state for recording, and as the property owner with disclosed cameras in common areas, I was on absolutely solid legal ground. No cameras in bedrooms or bathrooms, obviously. I'm not a creep, I'm a homeowner, protecting my investment. Everything was running smoothly for over a year. Great guests, 0 issues. I was averaging about 12 bookings a month between the main house and the carriage house apartment over the garage. Life was good. Then came the booking from hell. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October. I got a notification from Airbnb. New booking request. 3 nights. Friday through Monday. 4 guests. The profile belonged to a guy named Derek. 26 years old. Profile photo showed a guy in a backwards baseball cap giving a thumbs up. 0 reviews. Brand new account. Created that same day. Red flag number 1. I almost declined right there. My gut was screaming at me. But I'd had new accounts before that turned out to be perfectly fine. People sometimes create Airbnb accounts specifically to book a place they found through Google or a friend's recommendation. so I messaged Derek. Hi Derek, thanks for your interest in the Queen Anne. I see this is a new account. Just wanted to confirm the details of your stay. Is this a weekend getaway for 4? I like to make sure the space will be a good fit. His response came back 20 minutes later. Yeah, it's me and my GF and 2 friends just chillin' for the weekend. It's my GF's birthday. Okay, that's reasonable. Birthdays happen. I asked for a little more detail about the group, and he gave me the names. Himself, his girlfriend Brianna, and 2 friends, Marcus and Tanya. 4 people, matching the booking. I checked all 4 profiles. Marcus had 1 review from 2 years ago. Brianna and Tanya had no reviews. All 4 profiles were created within the past week. Red flag number 2. But here's the thing about Airbnb. If you decline too many booking requests, the algorithm penalizes your listing. Your search ranking drops. I'd worked hard to build up my superhost status and my placement in search results. And Derek had answered my questions. He'd confirmed it was just 4 people for a quiet birthday weekend. I accepted the booking. I want to pause here and acknowledge that, yes, in hindsight, I should have trusted my gut. Every single instinct I had was telling me this was a bad idea. But I've hosted probably 200 groups at this point and only ever had minor issues. A broken wine glass here, a late checkout there. I was complacent. I was overconfident in my systems. I thought my house rules and my cameras and my clear communication would be enough. They were not enough. But they were enough to save me. Friday arrived. I had a late lunch at a spot downtown and drove home around 2:30 to make sure everything was perfect. Fresh flowers on the foyer table, clean linens. The original mahogany dining table set with 4 places just as a nice touch. I left a small birthday card on the kitchen counter for Brianna, with a $15 gift card to a local coffee shop. Classy, right? That's how I rolled. I sent Derek the check-in instructions at 2:45 p.m. Welcome to the Queen Anne. The key lockbox code is 4729. It's on the porch railing to the right of the front door. House rules are posted on the foyer bulletin board and also in your Airbnb app. Enjoy your stay and happy birthday to Brianna. At 3:47 p.m., my foyer camera picked up a silver Chevy Tahoe pulling into the driveway. 4 people got out. Derek, matching his profile photo, wearing a Jersey's sports shirt and cargo shorts. A woman I assumed was Brianna, blonde, carrying a small overnight bag. Marcus, a big guy, maybe 6'2", wearing a tank top. And Tanya, who was on her phone before she even made it to the porch. They entered the house. I watched on the camera feed. Derek walked in, looked around, and I distinctly saw him say something to Marcus. Marcus laughed. They dropped their bags in the foyer and started walking through the house. I saw them go into the parlor, the dining room, the kitchen. Normal guest behavior, looking around, getting the lay of the land. Then, at 4:15 p.m., the Tahoe left. All 4 of them got in and drove away. Okay, fine. Maybe they went to grab dinner or supplies. I didn't think much of it. At 6:22 p.m., the Tahoe returned. But it wasn't just the 4 of them anymore. I watched on the driveway camera as the Tahoe pulled in, followed by a black Ram 1500 and a white Honda Civic. 9, maybe 10 additional people got out of the 3 vehicles. They were carrying cases of beer. One guy was carrying what looked like a DJ controller. A woman was carrying a balloon arrangement that said HBD in metallic letters. My stomach dropped. I opened the Airbnb app and messaged Derek immediately. Hi Derek, I noticed several additional cars and people arriving at the property. Just a reminder that the booking is for 4 guests maximum. Can you confirm what's going on? No response. I called him, straight to voicemail. I called again, voicemail again. I messaged him on the app. Derek, this is urgent. My cameras show significantly more than 4 people at the property. This is a violation of the house rules and the booking terms. Please respond immediately. Nothing. By 7:30 p.m., my driveway camera showed a 4th vehicle had arrived, a blue Mustang. 2 more people went inside. I could hear the bass from the music through the camera's microphone. Not just background music. Party music. The kind of volume you use when you want the whole neighborhood to hear. I called Airbnb's emergency host line. If you've never had to call this, let me tell you what happens. You sit on hold for approximately 11,000 years while bass-heavy music destroys your investment in the background. When I finally got a human being, a guy named Roger who sounded like he was reading from a script. I explained the situation. Unauthorized party, unauthorized guests. Booking was for 4. I counted at least 15 people on camera. Roger told me they would send a message to the guest and attempt to mediate. I said I didn't want mediation. I wanted them to leave. He said I could file a complaint through the resolution center after the stay was complete. I said the stay wasn't going to survive the night at this rate. He said he understood my frustration and that a specialized team would review my case. That was the last I heard from Airbnb that night. I watched the camera feeds until about 1 a.m. Here's what I saw. The party was in full swing by 9 p.m. The music was so loud that the foyer camera's audio was clipping. People were dancing in the parlor. I could see drinks being set down on every available surface. The antique side tables, the mahogany dining table, the windowsills. One guy was sitting on the arm of my 1890s Eastlake settee, which I had specifically noted in the house rules was a fragile antique not to be used for seating beyond the cushion. At 10:15 p.m., I saw someone spill what looked like red wine on the foyer wallpaper. The William Morris reproduction. The $1,200 custom order wallpaper. I almost threw my phone across the room. The person looked at it, laughed, and walked away. At 10:45 p.m., 2 women went out to the detached garage. I couldn't see inside the garage from any camera angle, but they came back 5 minutes later carrying what looked like more alcohol. My garage was supposed to be off-limits. It was clearly marked on the house rules and the door had a padlock. They had apparently cut the padlock or pried the hasp off. At 11:30 p.m., a fight nearly broke out on the front porch. 2 guys were shoving each other while other people tried to separate them. One of them put his fist through the screen door, my original 1887 screen door with the hand-forged hardware that I'd spent 2 months restoring. At midnight, I counted at least 22 people in and around the property. Cars were parked along both sides of the street. My neighbors' houses were close enough that there was no way they weren't hearing this. I called the non-emergency police line at 12:15 a.m., explained the situation, noise complaint, unauthorized party, property damage in progress. They said they'd send a unit. At 12:50 a.m., I saw a police cruiser's lights on the street. The music dipped. A few minutes later, the music came back up. I have no idea what was said, but the party continued. At 2:11 a.m., I made a decision. I was going over there. Not to confront anyone, I'm not stupid, but to document from the outside. I grabbed my phone, drove to a street adjacent to mine, and walked to the edge of my property line. I could hear the music from a block away. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree. People were on the front porch smoking. The lawn, my carefully maintained lawn with the heritage variety fescue I'd seeded myself, had bottles and cans scattered across it. I could see at least a dozen vehicles parked on the street. I took photos and video from the sidewalk, clear shots of the license plates on every vehicle, clear shots of the party happening in plain view through the windows. I recorded a solid 3 minutes of video showing people drinking, dancing, and generally destroying my home. Then I went home and didn't sleep. Saturday morning, 8 a.m. The party had apparently wound down around 4 a.m. based on the camera footage. I watched the last stragglers leave at 4:47 a.m. Derek was the last one out. He looked at the foyer camera on his way out the door, looked right at it, and gave a little wave. I still hadn't heard back from Airbnb. I called the emergency host line again. This time I got a woman named Patricia who was significantly more helpful. I explained everything. I told her I had camera footage of 20-plus unauthorized guests, visible property damage, and that my garage had been broken into. She escalated the case and told me a trust and safety specialist would call me within 4 hours. I didn't wait. At 9 a.m., I put on gloves, grabbed my phone to continue recording, and went to the property. I want to describe what I found in detail, because the details matter for what came later. The foyer, red wine stain on the William Morris wallpaper, about 8 inches in diameter. Scuff marks on the original pine floor, from what looked like someone dragging a cooler across it. The screen door had a fist-sized hole in the screen, and the original cast-iron hinges were bent. The parlor, my 1890s Eastlake settee, had a gouge in the arm where someone had apparently set down something sharp, maybe a bottle or a key. One of the original stained glass window transoms above the picture window had a crack running through it. The quarter-sawn oak mantel had burn marks on it, like someone had set something hot directly on the wood. There were ring stains on every surface. The oriental rug, a genuine 1920s Saruk that I'd paid $2,800 to have professionally cleaned and restored, had a massive dark stain in the center that I didn't even want to identify. The dining room. The mahogany table had scratches and what looked like knife marks. One of the original cane-bottom dining chairs had been broken. The seat was completely caved in. The birthday card I'd left for Brianna was on the floor, trampled. The coffee shop gift card was gone. The kitchen. Every dish I'd provided was either dirty or broken. The granite countertops had food ground into them. The vintage tile backsplash had a crack that definitely wasn't there before. It looked like someone had slammed something into it. The refrigerator was left open, and most of the food I'd stocked as a welcome amenity was either consumed or strewn across the counters. The hardwood floor was sticky with spilled drinks. The hallway, scuff marks. A hole in the plaster wall about the size of a fist, located conveniently at adult fist height. The original gas light fixtures, which had been converted to electric but still had the original glass shades, had one broken shade in the upstairs hallway. The bedrooms. I had 3 bedrooms available. The master had the original king bed with a mattress I'd spent $1,800 on. The sheets were stained, the mattress had a burn hole in it, a cigarette burn, in a non-smoking house. The other 2 bedrooms were similarly destroyed. Stains, damage, garbage left everywhere. The bathrooms, the clawfoot tub in the master bathroom had chips in the porcelain enamel. The original hex tile floor had cracks. There was something brown and mysterious smeared on the bathroom wall. I don't want to know what it was. The plumbing was making a horrible gurgling sound, which suggested something had been flushed that absolutely should not have been flushed. The garage, the padlock had been cut with what looked like bolt cutters. Inside, my storage situation was compromised. I kept seasonal decorations, some tools, and a few personal items in the garage. The tools were scattered. Some were missing: my Milwaukee impact driver, my oscillating multi-tool, and a set of socket wrenches, about $650 worth of tools. And then there was the item I didn't notice was missing until my second pass through the house: the mantel clock. This wasn't just any clock. It was an 1889 Ansonia clock that I'd found at an estate sale in Weaverville for $400, and spent another $600 having professionally restored. It was the centerpiece of the parlor mantel. It was insured, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that someone had looked at this beautiful antique, decided they wanted it, and simply took it. Theft, from my home, while I was sleeping a mile away, watching them destroy everything I'd built on a camera feed. I was shaking, not from fear, from rage. I spent the next 3 hours documenting everything. I took photos of every single piece of damage. I shot video walking through every room. I pulled up my camera footage from the previous night and started making clips. I made a detailed inventory of everything that was damaged, broken, or missing. Then I went to the Asheville Police Department and filed a report. The officer who took my report was named Castillo. Young guy, maybe 28, very professional. I showed him the photos. I showed him the camera footage on my phone. I explained the situation: unauthorized guests, property damage, theft. He asked if the guests were still at the property. I said they'd left early that morning. He asked for the booking information, the guest's name, and any other identifying details. Here's where it gets interesting from a legal perspective. Officer Castillo told me that because the guests had exceeded the authorized occupancy, they were technically trespassing after the first unauthorized person entered. The original 4 had a legitimate, if now violated, booking, but everyone after person number 4 was trespassing. And because property damage and theft occurred during the trespass, we were looking at potential felony charges. He filed the report. Case number 2024-APD8847. I had it in my phone within an hour. Saturday afternoon, I finally heard from Airbnb. A trust and safety specialist named Glenn called me. Glenn sounded like he was about 12 years old and reading from a very limited script. He asked me to describe the damage. I described it. He asked if I had documentation. I said I had photos, video, camera footage, a police report, and a detailed inventory. He told me to upload everything to the resolution center. I said, "Glenn, the guests are still at the property. Their checkout isn't until Monday." A pause. "Oh, do you want us to cancel the reservation?" "Yes, I want them out of my house." He put me on hold for 10 minutes, came back and said they'd sent Derek a message asking him to leave. I asked what would happen if he didn't. Glenn said they would continue to reach out. I said that wasn't good enough. He said it was the most they could do at this time. I want to be very clear about something. Airbnb's host protection is largely theatrical. They have these warm, reassuring messages in their app about how they've got your back. In practice, when something actually goes wrong, you're on your own. They can send messages. They can de-escalate. They cannot remove someone from your property. That's a law enforcement matter. And I'd already learned how effective law enforcement was the previous night. Saturday evening, Derek messaged me on Airbnb. "Hey, sorry about last night, my friends got a little carried away. Lol, it's under control now." Under control. My $2,800 Saruk rug had a stain the size of a dinner plate. My 1889 Ansonia clock was gone. My screen door had been punched through. Under control. I didn't respond. I was building my case. Sunday morning, I went back to the property. More damage had materialized. The guests, who knows how many were still there, had apparently cooked something in the kitchen using my cast iron skillet and had left it on the stove with a gallon of cooking oil still in it. The stove's enamel was stained. The kitchen ceiling had a grease spot on it from splatter. My copper pots, a set of 5 that I'd inherited from my grandmother, had been used and left filthy. 2 of them had been put in the dishwasher, which is a fantastic way to destroy copper. I called Officer Castillo and added to my police report. I also called my insurance agent. I have a specific rider on my homeowner's insurance for the short-term rental. State Farm was sympathetic but told me I'd need to go through Airbnb's host guarantee first, which brings me to the next chapter of this nightmare. Airbnb's host guarantee. Let me tell you about this beautiful piece of corporate theater. They advertise up to $1 million in protection. Sounds great, right? In practice, it's a labyrinth of documentation requirements, adjusters who take weeks to respond, and a claims process designed to wear you down until you accept a fraction of what you're owed. But I wasn't going to be worn down. I was going to be the most documented, most thorough, most relentless claimant in Airbnb's history. Monday, checkout day. 11 a.m. came and went. At noon, the Tahoe was still in the driveway. At 1 p.m., I called the non-emergency line and requested a civil standby. I explained that I had guests who had refused to leave and I needed to access my property. 2 officers arrived at 1:45 p.m. I met them at the end of the street and walked them through the situation. Showed them my booking confirmation, the house rules, the camera footage, and the police report from Saturday. Officer Daniels, the senior of the 2, looked at the footage and said, "You've got them dead to rights on the trespass. Let's go knock." We walked up to the house. Officers first. They knocked on the front door. It took about 2 minutes for someone to answer. It was Marcus. Big guy, no shirt, looking like he'd been sleeping for about 3 hours. Officer Daniels explained that the checkout time had passed and they needed to vacate the property. Marcus, to his credit, didn't argue. He nodded and went inside. Over the next 30 minutes, the remaining people, 6 of them, not 4, gathered their things and left. Derek was the last one out. He saw me standing behind the officers. He actually had the audacity to smile. "Thanks for the stay, man. Really nice place." I said nothing. I just stared at him. Officer Daniels gave him a look that said, "Move along," and Derek got in the Tahoe and left. I walked into my house and did a full assessment. It was worse than Saturday. 2 more days of occupation had added. A broken window in the kitchen, the lower pane of the original double hung, additional stains on the carpet in the upstairs hallway, a broken towel rack ripped out of the bathroom wall, and the complete disappearance of my grandmother's copper pot set. 5 pieces, gone. I documented everything. Again, more photos, more video, more inventory updates. The total damage assessment, which I compiled with the help of a local restoration company that came out on Tuesday, came to $34,780. Broken down, wallpaper replacement and restoration, $3,200 screen door repair and hardware restoration, $1,400 East Lake settee repair, $2,100 stained glass transom repair, $4,500 Saruk rug cleaning, restoration, if salvageable, or replacement, $2,800 mahogany table refinishing, $1,800 cane bottom chair replacement, $950 mattress replacement, $1,800 clawfoot tub refinishing, $2,200 cane bottom chair replacement, $950 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 cane $3,400 plumbing repair, $850 hardwood floor refinishing throughout, $4,200 window repair, $1,600 copper pot replacement, $1,200 sentimental value, priceless, tool replacement, $650 Ansonia clock replacement, $1,000, insured value, actual value after restoration, much higher, garage door/lock replacement, $350 general cleaning and biohazard remediation, $1,580. I'm rounding up to $34,780 with some incidentals I discovered later. This doesn't count the 2 nights of lost rental income, the listing being suspended during the investigation, or the emotional toll. You can't put a price on walking through the home you spent 7 years restoring and finding it looking like a fraternity house after a tailgate. Now here's where the story takes a turn that made my jaw drop. On Wednesday, 3 days after checkout, I got a notification from Airbnb. Derek had filed a damage claim against ME. His claim stated that the property was not as described and that he had been injured by a loose handrail on the staircase. He was claiming $15,000 in medical damages and demanded a full refund of his $1,200 booking fee. I stared at my phone for a full minute, then I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. It was either laugh or put my fist through a wall, and I'd seen enough property damage for 1 week. Let me unpack the audacity of this. Derek broke into my garage, destroyed my home, stole my belongings, hosted an unauthorized party with at least 20 people, and then filed a personal injury claim against me? The handrail? The handrail that I had personally reinforced when I restored the staircase in 2019? The handrail that had passed a city building inspection? This wasn't just a false claim. This was retaliatory. This was a preemptive strike designed to make me look like the bad actor. I'd seen this pattern before on Airbnb host forums. Bad guests filing damage claims against hosts as a defense mechanism, hoping to create enough confusion and counter-accusations that the platform would just split the difference and move on. But Derek didn't know who he was dealing with. I responded to the claim through the Resolution Center with a single sentence. I have comprehensive camera footage of the entire stay. I also have a police report. I will be providing both to the Resolution Center, to your insurance carrier, and to the Asheville Police Department for their ongoing investigation into theft and property damage. I then called Glenn back at Airbnb Trust and Safety. I told him about Derek's claim. I told him I had footage showing the staircase handrail was never touched, showed Derek and his guests causing all the damage, and showed them removing my property. Glenn said he would note this in the file. I said, Glenn, I need you to understand the severity of this. He's claiming an injury that didn't happen to deflect from the $34,000 in damage his group caused. This is insurance fraud. Glenn said he understood and that the matter would be reviewed by the appropriate team. I hung up and got to work. Over the next 2 weeks, I built what my attorney would later call the most airtight case file I've seen in 20 years of practice. Here's what I put together. 1. Camera footage compilation. I went through every minute of footage from all 4 cameras, from check-in to check-out. I created a time-stamped, annotated video compilation. Every instance of property damage was clipped and cataloged. Every unauthorized guest entering the property was counted and time-stamped. The footage clearly showed the moment the screen door was punched. It showed the red wine spill on the wallpaper. It showed the broken window. It showed people carrying my tools and copper pots to vehicles in the driveway. It showed Derek himself removing the Ansonia clock from the mantel and carrying it out to the Tahoe. 2. Photographic evidence. 247 photos, every angle of every piece of damage. Before photos from my listing compared to after photos. Close-ups of every scratch, stain, crack, and gouge. 3. The police report and subsequent updates. Case number 24-APD-8847, with all the documentation I'd provided. 4. Professional damage assessment. The restoration company, Heritage Restoration of Asheville, who I'd actually used during my initial restoration, provided a written estimate for all repairs with line items and costs. 5. The booking records, showing the booking was for 4 guests. Showing the check-in and check-out times. Showing my messages to Derek and his failure to respond. 6. The house rules and disclosures. Screenshot of the listing showing the camera disclosure. Screenshot of the house rules. Screenshot of the welcome message. 7. The timeline, a detailed hour-by-hour timeline of everything that happened, cross-referenced with camera footage timestamps. 8. Neighbor statements. I went to my 3 closest neighbors and asked if they'd be willing to provide statements. All 3 had been disturbed by the party. Mrs. Henderson, my next-door neighbor who is 74 and has lived in her home since 1971, wrote a 2-page handwritten statement describing the noise, the cars, and her distress. She also mentioned that at one point, someone from the party had urinated in her azalea bushes. 9. Receipts and appraisals. Every receipt for every item that had been stolen or damaged. The original purchase receipt for the Ansonia clock, the professional restoration receipt, the Saruk rug appraisal, the copper pot set documentation, the tool receipts. 10. Derek's false claim. His demand for $15,000 and a full refund, preserved in the Airbnb Resolution Center. I hired an attorney. Not because I wasn't confident, but because this had moved beyond an Airbnb dispute. This was a legal matter involving theft, property damage, potential insurance fraud, and enough evidence to pursue criminal charges. My attorney was Sandra Kim, a former prosecutor who now specialized in property and small business law. She reviewed my file and literally said, "Daniel, this is the most airtight case file I've seen in 20 years of practice." I told you she'd say that earlier, but she actually said it. Sandra's plan was 3-pronged. Prong 1, criminal prosecution. She contacted the Asheville Police Department and provided them with the full evidence package. Given the clear evidence of theft, the clock, the copper pots, the tools, all visible on camera being carried off the property, and property damage exceeding $5,000, this met the threshold for felony larceny and felony damage to property in North Carolina. Detective Reynolds was assigned to the case. Prong 2, civil lawsuit. Sandra drafted a complaint for conversion, the civil equivalent of theft, trespass, and property damage. The total ask was $34,780 in actual damages plus $50,000 in punitive damages. We filed in Buncombe County Superior Court. Prong 3, Airbnb resolution. I submitted the full evidence package through the Airbnb Resolution Center in response to Derek's claim and my own counterclaim for damages. Let me take each prong one at a time, because they all moved forward simultaneously, and they're all satisfying in different ways. The criminal investigation moved faster than I expected. Detective Reynolds called me on a Thursday, 2 days after Sandra made contact. He'd reviewed the footage and was impressed by the documentation. He said, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and usually with these kinds of cases, it's he said, she said. You've got these people on camera literally carrying your stuff out the door." He obtained Derek's contact information from the Airbnb booking and called him. Derek, predictably, didn't answer. Detective Reynolds then went to Derek's last known address, which was the billing address on the Airbnb account. It turned out to be his parents' house in a suburb of Charlotte. Derek's mother answered the door. When Detective Reynolds explained why he was there, she turned pale and gave him Derek's actual address, an apartment in Charlotte. She also, unprompted, said, "I told him that Airbnb thing was a bad idea. I told him." Detective Reynolds drove to Charlotte the following Monday. He didn't find Derek at the apartment, but he found the Tahoe in the parking lot, and visible through the apartment's ground floor window, he could see the Ansonia clock sitting on a shelf. Bingo! He left a business card and a message. Derek called him back that evening. In the recorded phone call, North Carolina is a one-party consent state. Derek admitted to attending the party, but claimed he didn't know about the damage or the theft. He said, maybe some other people did that. When Detective Reynolds mentioned the clock visible through the window, there was a long silence, and then Derek said, I can explain that. He could not explain that. On the civil side, Sandra had served Derek, Brianna, Marcus, and Tanya with the lawsuit. All four were named as defendants. Service was completed within 10 days. Brianna and Tanya were the easiest to serve. They both worked at a retail store in Charlotte and were served at work. Marcus was served at his gym. Derek was served by Detective Reynolds during their phone call follow-up. Here's where it gets really good. Derek hired a lawyer, a guy named Hoffman who did mostly DUI defense and small claims. Not a bad guy, from what I gathered, but completely out of his depth in a civil litigation case with this much evidence. Hoffman filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the camera footage was obtained illegally and should be suppressed. Sandra filed a response that was essentially, the cameras were disclosed in the listing, the house rules, the check-in instructions, and the welcome message. The defendant's client acknowledged receipt of all of these. The cameras were in common areas only. No expectation of privacy exists in common areas of a short-term rental. The motion is frivolous and sanctions should be considered. The judge denied the motion to dismiss. He also noted, for the record, that the footage was devastating to the defense. Hoffman then tried a different approach. He argued that Derek wasn't responsible for the actions of the other guests. Sandra's response was beautiful. She pointed to the camera footage showing Derek personally inviting people in, Derek carrying the Ansonia clock out, and Derek giving a thumbs-up gesture to the camera on his way out. She also pointed out that Derek was the booking party and the only person with a contractual relationship to the property. If he brought in 20 extra people, that was on him. Then came the deposition. I wasn't present for Derek's deposition, but Sandra gave me the highlights. Derek showed up without his attorney. Hoffman had apparently sent an associate who was even less prepared. Under oath, Derek was asked about the party. He admitted there were some extra people, but claimed it was maybe 10, not 20. Sandra showed him the footage and asked him to count the people entering the property. He counted to 24 and stopped talking. He was asked about the clock. He said he found it and thought it was maybe a free gift or something. Sandra asked if that was a serious statement under oath. He said he'd meant to ask about it. She showed him footage of himself examining the clock, picking it up, looking around as if checking if anyone was watching, and carrying it to the Tahoe. He was asked about the $15,000 injury claim. He said his hand did kind of hurt from the handrail. Sandra produced his social media posts from the weekend of the party. I had found these myself. Screenshots of his Instagram stories showing him doing shots, dancing, and fist-bumping people with both hands. No sign of any injury. She also produced footage of him carrying cases of beer into the house with both hands, gripping firmly, no sign of discomfort. He was asked about the copper pots. He said he didn't know anything about them. Sandra showed him footage of Marcus carrying the copper pots to the Ram 1500. Derek said Marcus must have done that on his own. Sandra pointed out that Derek had let Marcus into the property, meaning Marcus was his guest and his responsibility. By the end of the deposition, Derek had admitted under oath to hosting a party that exceeded the booking by at least 20 people, observing property damage and not reporting it, personally removing an antique clock from the property, and filing a false insurance claim for an injury that did not occur. Sandra told me later that Derek's attorney, Hoffman, called her after the deposition and basically said, "Can we settle this? My client is an idiot." Sandra said, $34,780 in actual damages, plus legal fees, plus my client's lost rental income for the 2 months the property was under repair. Hoffman countered with $5,000. Sandra laughed. Literally laughed at him on the phone. She said she'd see him in court. Meanwhile, the Airbnb resolution was a separate circus. Their process works like this. Both parties submit evidence, a mediator reviews it, and they make a recommendation. I submitted everything. Derek submitted nothing, or rather, he submitted a 2-paragraph statement claiming the property was already damaged when we got there and that the cameras were hidden. The mediator, a woman named Karen who apparently had all of 5 minutes to review my 200-page evidence package, initially proposed a mutual resolution where I would receive $2,000 from Derek and Derek would receive a full refund. I nearly lost my mind. I responded with, "This proposal is unacceptable. The evidence clearly shows $34,780 in damages and theft, all captured on disclosed cameras. The guest's counterclaim is demonstrably false. I will escalate this to Airbnb's executive customer service team and, if necessary, to the North Carolina Attorney General's office for failure to enforce the host guarantee." That got their attention. Within 48 hours, I was contacted by someone from what they called their executive escalations team. A guy named Thomas who actually seemed to have authority. Thomas reviewed the full file and, to his credit, immediately understood the situation. He reversed Derek's damage claim, issued me a full payout under the host guarantee for $34,780, and referred Derek's account for permanent banning. But wait, there's more. Thomas also told me that because of the severity of the case and the evidence of fraud, Airbnb would be conducting their own internal investigation and would cooperate with law enforcement. They provided Detective Reynolds with the complete booking history, payment records, and identity verification for all 4 guests. On the criminal side, Detective Reynolds presented the case to the Buncombe County District Attorney's Office. Given the evidence, particularly the video footage, the deposition testimony, and the clear value of the stolen items exceeding the felony threshold, the DA's office moved quickly. In January, 3 months after the incident, Derek Thompson, age 26, of Charlotte, North Carolina, was charged with felony larceny, felony damage to property, and filing a false insurance claim. Marcus Williams, age 27, also of Charlotte, was charged with felony larceny and felony damage to property as an accessory. The DA's office declined to prosecute Brianna and Tanya due to insufficient evidence of their direct participation in the theft and damage, though both were named in the civil suit. Derek was arrested on a Tuesday morning. Marcus turned himself in on Wednesday. Both were released on bail. Derek's was set at $15,000, Marcus's at $10,000. The case went to court in April. I testified. Sandra walked me through it beforehand, and I was prepared, but nothing really prepares you for sitting in a witness stand and describing the 7 years you spent restoring a home while a jury watches footage of people destroying it. The prosecution played the camera footage, the full compilation, every moment of damage, every stolen item, every extra guest walking through the door. They played Derek's deposition testimony. They played the 911 call I'd made. They showed Mrs. Henderson's statement about the party and the Azalea Bush incident. Derek's attorney, Hoffman, tried to argue that the value of the stolen items was inflated. Sandra had brought in a certified appraiser who testified that the Ansonia clock, in its restored condition, had a fair market value of $2,400. The copper pot set was valued at $1,800, the tools at $650. Total theft value, $4,850, well above the felony threshold for North Carolina. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Derek Thompson was convicted of felony larceny, felony damage to property, and filing a false insurance claim. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison, suspended to 90 days of active confinement, 18 months of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and full restitution of $34,780 plus court costs. His driver's license was suspended for 1 year. Marcus Williams pled guilty to misdemeanor accessory charges in a plea deal and received 12 months of unsupervised probation, 50 hours of community service, and $4,850 in restitution for the items he was seen carrying off the property. The civil suit settled 3 weeks after the criminal verdict. With Derek's conviction on the record, Hoffman had absolutely zero leverage. The final settlement was $34,780 in actual damages, $8,500 in legal fees, $4,200 for lost rental income during the 2-month repair period, and a signed acknowledgement of liability. Total, $47,480. Derek was ordered to pay within 60 days. Did he pay? Not willingly. I had to go through a collection process. Sandra filed a wage garnishment through Derek's employer. He worked at a car dealership in Charlotte. Once the garnishment hit, his employer was legally required to withhold a portion of his paycheck and send it to the court. Derek was reportedly furious. I was reportedly satisfied. Let me talk about the repairs for a minute, because this was its own saga. Heritage Restoration of Asheville started the work in December. The wallpaper was the most complicated piece. The William Morris reproduction had to be custom ordered again from England. It took 6 weeks to arrive. In the meantime, they worked on the structural damage. The stained glass transom was sent to a specialist in Tennessee who did incredible work. You honestly can't tell it was ever damaged. That repair alone was $4,500 and worth every penny. The hardwood floors required a full sanding and refinishing throughout the first floor. 3 days of sanding, 2 coats of stain, 3 coats of polyurethane. The original pine floors are beautiful again, but they're not MY floors anymore, you know? Someone else's careless shoe scuffs are now sealed permanently under a fresh coat of polyurethane. It's a weird feeling. The clawfoot tub was refinished by a company that specializes in antique porcelain. They came to the house, set up a ventilation system, and spent 2 days spraying and curing. It looks great, but again, it's been repaired. It's not untouched anymore. The Saruk rug was sent to a specialist in Atlanta. They were able to get most of the stain out, but there's a faint shadow where the worst of it was. They told me it was the best they could do. It's in my living room now, and most people wouldn't notice. I notice, every single day. I never got the clock back. It was returned to me by the Charlotte Police Department's property room, but it had been damaged in transit or in Derek's possession. The pendulum was missing, and the movement was seized up. My restoration specialist said it would cost another $800 to get it running again. I had it done. It's on the mantle where it belongs, ticking away, keeping time like it has since 1889. The copper pots were recovered from Marcus's apartment. 2 of the 5 were damaged beyond repair from being put in the dishwasher. I replaced the full set because they were my grandmother's, and the set needed to be complete. Insurance covered the replacement cost, but you can't insure sentimental value. Total time out of service, 2 months and 11 days. During that time, I couldn't host any guests in the main house. The carriage house apartment was unaffected, so I still had some income, but I lost approximately 6 times $400 in main house bookings that had to be canceled. The court awarded me $4,200 of that, the documented amount, in the civil settlement. Let me talk about Airbnb for a minute, because I think my experience is instructive for other hosts. After everything was resolved, I requested a meeting with someone from Airbnb's host advocacy team. I didn't get a meeting, but I did get a phone call from a senior policy person who wanted to understand my experience. I gave them an earful. Here's what I told them. Your emergency host line is useless. When I called to report an active unauthorized party, the response was to send a message. The police were more responsive, and they have no authority over your platform. Your resolution process is biased toward keeping both parties on the platform. The initial mediator proposed a mutual resolution that would have had me eating $32,000 in damages. That's not mediation, that's absurdity. Your host guarantee is misleading. $1 million protection means nothing if the claims process is designed to minimize payouts. I had to escalate to an executive team to get a fair outcome, and most hosts don't know how to do that. You need better screening for new accounts making high-value bookings. A brand new account with no reviews booking a $400 slasher night historic property should trigger additional verification. It didn't. The policy person listened politely and said they would take my feedback into consideration. I'm not holding my breath. I made several changes to my own hosting practices after this experience. 1. No more new accounts. Period. If your profile was created in the last 6 months and you have fewer than 3 positive reviews, I will decline your booking. I don't care what it does to my search ranking. 2. Higher security deposit. I increased my security deposit from $500 to $2,500. Airbnb limits how much you can charge, but I maxed it out. 3. More cameras. I added 2 additional cameras, one covering the backyard and one covering the side entrance to the garage, all disclosed, all in common areas, all legal. 4. Smart locks. I replaced the key lockbox with a smart lock system that gives me real-time notifications of every entry and exit. If someone enters the garage after hours, I know immediately. 5. Shorter maximum stay. I reduced the maximum booking length from 7 nights to 3. This limits the damage potential and the opportunity for unauthorized guests to accumulate. 6. Neighbor coordination. I gave Mrs. Henderson and my other neighbors my direct phone number and asked them to call me immediately if they see or hear anything suspicious. Mrs. Henderson said, "Honey, I've been watching your house since before you were born. You don't need to ask." 7. Insurance review. I increased my homeowner's insurance coverage and added a specific rider for short-term rental damage. I also purchased a separate short-term rental insurance policy through a company called Proper Insurance that specializes in Airbnb Verbo coverage and actually pays claims without the Airbnb runaround. 8. Legal retainer. I keep Sandra on a retainer now. It costs me $500 a month and it's the best money I spend. Some people have asked me if I'm still hosting on Airbnb after all this. The answer is yes, but differently. I'm more selective. I trust my gut. I have better systems. And I have the kind of evidence infrastructure that means if anyone even thinks about pulling something like this again, I'll have them on camera from 12 angles before they can say, "But it wasn't me." Let me tell you about the most satisfying moment of this whole saga. It happened about 2 months after the criminal trial. I was at a restaurant in downtown Asheville, the same spot where I'd had lunch the day before Derek checked in, actually, and I got a notification on my phone. It was a message from Airbnb, not a booking request, a system message. Your feedback has resulted in the following action. The account referenced in case #8847SHAYASV has been permanently removed from the Airbnb platform. All associated accounts have also been flagged and removed. Thank you for helping maintain trust in our community. 4 accounts, permanently banned: Derek, Brianna, Marcus, and Tanya, all gone. They can never book an Airbnb again, not under those names, not under those profiles, not with those payment methods. Airbnb ties your identity verification to your booking capability. Banned means banned. And because Airbnb cooperated with law enforcement and shared the booking data, Derek's conviction and the associated record will follow him. Background checks for employment, housing applications, professional licenses, they'll all show a felony conviction for theft and property damage. For a 26-year-old, that's not nothing. That's a life-altering consequence. Was the punishment proportional? Some people might say no. 18 months suspended to 90 days seems light for $34,000 in damages. But here's how I think about it. Derek is going to be paying me for the next several years through wage garnishment. His probation means any misstep sends him to prison for the full sentence. He has a felony record. He's banned from Airbnb and presumably other short-term rental platforms. He's publicly associated with being the kind of person who destroys someone's home and steals from them and then tries to blame the victim. That's not nothing. That's a lot. And for me, the house is restored. It's not perfect. There are ghost traces of the damage that only I can see, little reminders every day of what happened. The wallpaper is new, but it's not the original installation. The floors have been refinished, but they've been sanded down a layer thinner than they should be. The rug has its shadow, the clock ticks, but it spent time in a Charlotte police evidence locker, and it feels different to me now. But the house stands. It's survived worse than Derek Thompson. It survived a century and a half of winters, a fire in the 1950s that damaged the second floor, a period in the 1970s when it was carved up into 4 apartments, and years of neglect before I found it. It'll survive this. I still host. I had a lovely couple from Chicago stay last weekend. They left a thank you note on the kitchen counter that said, "This is the most beautiful home we've ever stayed in. You can feel the love that went into every detail." I stood in the foyer and read that note, and I cried. Not sad tears, just the release of everything that had built up over those months. The rage, the frustration, the helplessness of watching it all unfold on a screen, the exhaustion of the legal battle, the grief of seeing my work destroyed. The house is still here. I'm still here. And Derek Thompson is a convicted felon with a garnished paycheck and a permanent ban from the platform he tried to game. They picked the wrong host. If you're an Airbnb host reading this, take my story as both a cautionary tale and a playbook. Document everything, disclose your cameras, trust your gut, and for the love of everything, get a good attorney's number in your phone before you need it. If you're a guest reading this, the vast majority of you are wonderful, and I mean that sincerely. Understand that your host's home might represent years of their life, their savings, and their heart. Treat it accordingly. And if you're Derek, I hope you enjoy that clock. Oh wait, you can't. It's back where it belongs. Right where it belongs.